Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. Amorphous solid dispersions, or ASDs, are a common technique used to improve the solubility and bioavailability of drugs that are poorly soluble in water. In this episode, we explore the ASD market in depth with Elizabeth Hickman, who's the incoming CEO for AustinPx's, a company focused on making spray drying more efficient and sustainable. And as one of the few female CEOs in the industry, we talk about her advice for how to improve gender diversity. Amorphous solid dispersion is important for improving the solubility and bioavailability of APIs and other pharmaceutical compounds. However, traditional techniques such as spray drying involves huge amounts of damaging solvents, not very sustainable, and obviously taming those emissions is a key priority for most. So we're going to talk now about amorphous dispersion challenges and how the next generation of solvent-free manufacturing techniques can solve for this. Elizabeth, you're the expert. Please, let's start with an introduction to amorphous dispersion, what it is and why it's used in the first place, please.
Thank you so much for having me on, Luke. It's great to be here and to talk about something very near and dear to my heart. An amorphous dispersion is a non-crystalline form of a drug dispersed in an amorphous form with an excipient matrix. Typically, that matrix is polymer. Sometimes the polymer can be mixed with other excipients to enhance the stability of the amorphous form. So typically I like to break down an amorphous dispersion in very simple terms for people who might not be chemists, that if you consider most APIs, small molecules, they're in a highly structured environment, they're in crystal. If you break up that crystal lattice and take out all the order from the crystalline drug, that's an amorphous dispersion. And when you break up a drug that typically wants to be in a crystal structure and put it in a state of chaos where it doesn't have that crystal lattice, it usually wants to go back to that crystal structure. So you have to stabilize it with the polymer and how you manufacture it. And that's how you get manufacturing processes for amorphous dispersions. You can create amorphous dispersions using different methods like hot melt extrusion and spray drying, and KinetiSol, which is something that my company offers through our services. And it depends a lot on the characteristic of the drug and the different ways that you can actually manufacture it into amorphous dispersion.
Great. So how much of the market then relies on this type of technology? The overall market size for ASD, what would you say that is?
Yeah, so there's different ways of looking at the market. So, I'm in the outsourcing market with the CDMO. If you look at the outsourced amorphous dispersion market size, we estimate it to be around 1.4 billion. Spray drying represents about 700 million of that. If you look at the pipeline alone, we estimate that 70% of new molecules are poorly soluble, and about 50% of those are going to need some kind of enablement technology like spray drying or hot melt extrusion or KinetiSol.
Okay, 70% then of small molecule drugs would require something like this.
Yes, some kind of enabling technology, and that can be also lipid delivery or particle size reduction as well. But for amorphous dispersion, it's about 50% of those poorly soluble drugs.
Got it. So why is solvent-based spray drying so damaging to the environment?
The leading amorphous dispersion technology is solvent-based spray drying. Growth in solvent-based spray drying is due to the increasing number of high melting point drugs entering the pipeline. Therefore, technologies that use heat to convert it to an amorphous form, like hot melt extrusion, won't work because it leads to degradation of the molecule. So a lot of drugs have then entered the spray drying technology. Spray drying has been around for 50 plus years. It's used to make powdered milk, excipients, paint pigments, and it was first introduced to the pharmaceutical industry in the 1940s, typically using an aqueous media, so water, to turn it into an amorphous to turn it into a spray dry dispersion. As new drug candidates present more solubility challenges, we've started using organic solvents. Typically, the scale of a spray dryer in the very early phases is pretty small. You can put that into a prototype suite. It can easily fit into a smaller manufacturing suite, but as you scale that up in order to make more and more and get to commercial quantities, you're starting to look at very large footprints for spray dried dispersions. The largest spray dryer I've seen myself is what's called a PSD6. It's in a 5-story building and requires a significant footprint. It requires a large amount of solvents to be able to solubilize that amount of drug. You also need nitrogen in the process which is what's used to heat and dry the amorphous dispersion particles. And then, there's utilities around that from, EH&S to operations to facility maintenance. If you look at the pipeline and the number of new molecules coming in, they're starting to present even lower and lower solvent solubility. And the need for more toxic organic solvents at higher volumes is starting to be required. This leads to manufacturing challenges like low solids loading and solvents, yield challenges, long spray drying times, and poor particle characteristics like poor flow. It has compressibility challenges for putting it into a tablet, leading to higher pill burden. So when you look at all the drugs on the market, there's an estimate that there's 40 amorphous dispersion drugs on the market, and 20 of those are solvent-based spray-dried molecules. If you extrapolate from that, because there's no public information out there about how much solvent is being used specifically for spray-dried dispersions. But if you extrapolate based on the patent literature that is out there, and also the number of drugs, we estimate that it's about 8,000 metric tons of solvent per year are used by the industry to support solvent-based spray drying. So that's a significant amount of solvent, right? It pales in comparison to the amount of solvent that's being used to make APIs itself. But if you look at just the finished drug aspect of things, it is a significant amount of solvent, which is an impact to both the cost of manufacturing, the maintenance, the safety, and the environment.
Very interesting. Thank you. Tell us then about KinetiSol and how that's trying to solve some of these issues, please.
AustinPx's is the inventor of KinetiSol, which is a thermokinetic processing technology. It's a non-solvent way of making amorphous dispersions. It utilizes high mixing speeds with frictional and shear force that rapidly solubilizes the drug into the excipient carrier.
Where did it come from? A new technology was developed in-house? What's the story, please?
Yeah, there's a great story about the development of KinetiSol. So 2 of our founders, Chris Bruff, who is our Chief Technology Officer, and Dave Miller, who is our Chief Scientific Officer, Chris Bruff was working in the plastics industry, was working in the plastics recycling industry. He had invented a technology that was able to recycle mixed plastics in order to create new materials, and being able to recycle mixed plastics is a challenge in the industry. So he was actually he utilized that technology to make railroad ties out of recycled plastic. And these machines that he had created are huge, right? They're making metric tons of things in order to make these railroad ties. So he had an investor in his company who happened to be our CSO, Dave Miller's uncle. And he learned enough about this technology to recognize when Dave Miller was at a dinner with him talking about some of the challenges he had in his PhD studies of trying to solubilize really challenging molecules with hot melt extrusion, because he was getting his PhD at UT. And he mentioned, I'm trying to create amorphous dispersions with these drugs. And his uncle said, hey, I recognize this. You should talk to Chris Bruff, who is, in my company that I've invested in.
Hmm.
So, serendipity is everything in our industry, right?
Absolutely.
So he and Dave got together, talked a little bit, and Chris said, "Well, just come up and let's give it a try." And Dave said, "Well, how much material do you need?" And he said something like kilograms. Dave, who works in the pharmaceutical industry, at first was like, "Well, good thing I'm working with a generic drug because I'll have that much material." So he brought it up to the site. They put it through the equipment, and Dave was blown away at how fast it was, and the material came out. He took a small amount, went and tested it. They ran a couple of additional molecules, and all of them were perfectly amorphous and very stable.
Hmm.
So that led to conversations, and Chris and Dave then got together, started Dispersol, which was the original format of our company, to one, develop the KinetiSol technology for pharmaceuticals, with key thing being that they needed to reduce the footprint, right? So in pharmaceuticals, starting very small. So instead of going from a small piece of equipment and scaling it up to be able to support commercial, they went the opposite direction. So Chris was able to create the smaller equipment. We have two scales of equipment here. We have an R&D piece of equipment, which is very small. It can easily be rolled in and out. And then our commercial equipment, which is also a small footprint for commercial scale equipment. It can also fit in a or a pilot scale manufacturing facility.
So to your point earlier about the traditional way of doing it, it requires a 5-story building. How big are your units in comparison?
Significantly smaller than a commercial spray drying operation. If a commercial scale spray dryer needs to be in a 5-story building, ours can be in a typical manufacturing plant, with a single story but higher ceilings so that you can have powder loading with the hopper. But the facility requirements are very low.
Great.
And you don't need nitrogen, you don't need solvents.
What's the impact been so far then for your clients who are integrating KinetiSol technology into their pipeline? What kind of benefits are they seeing?
Yeah, so they're seeing benefits from higher performance of the amorphous dispersion, meaning seeing higher bioavailability. They're seeing improved stability of the amorphous dispersion. They're also seeing, manufacturing improvements. We can make the amount of product that's needed much faster in a fraction of the amount of time. And then also the particle characteristics of the drugs have a lot of benefits. They have improved flow and compressibility. So there's been a lot of interest from the industry to test and utilize KinetiSol in their drug candidate.
So better efficacy, sustainability, cost. There's got to be some kind of downside, surely.
Sure, it's a new technology. We work in a very risk-averse industry, right? So nobody wants to be the first waffle out of the iron, so to speak. So, we've got work to do as a company to show people that they have a path to commercialization, and we're working very hard to make sure that we work with commercial partners or our pharmaceutical partners to understand what their commercial path is, from either placement of the equipment at their facilities, working with our CMO partners for them to have access to the equipment there, or in the very long term, investing in commercial ourselves.
Great. So you've just moved into this new role in January, and probably I don't think you're the only female CEO within a contract manufacturer, but pretty much it's a small amount of you, unfortunately. So we're just really interested, talk a little bit about why that might be and your career more generally.
Yeah, great question. So there are a few of us for sure. One that I can think of off the top of my head is Nikki Whitfield. She's the CEO of Upperton in the UK. She's a female CEO for the CDMO industry, but you're correct. There's not a lot of us. When I think about why, there's probably the traditional things in the industry as well as just society that have prevented that. But I certainly see that path is changing, and I fully expect that the CDMO industry will have multiple female CDMOs in the years to come. Just to talk a little bit about my career path, I like the term that not all who wander are lost when it comes to my career path. I studied microbiology in my undergraduate studies, but I realized very quickly during summer internships that working in a lab just wasn't the thing for me. So I started exploring alternative careers in sciences. And during my MBA program, I had the opportunity of doing an internship with a CDMO. That CDMO was Pharmatech in San Diego, which the president of the company was Tim Scott, who is our AustinPx's first CEO. That led to my first job in the CDMO industry, and it really helped launch my future. And then over the years, I worked at several small CDMOs, which was important as it exposed me to different business models and different types of technology, and also different phases of manufacturing. So a lot of really good exposure there. And, honestly, I'm lucky to have multiple mentors and supervisors throughout my career that recognized my potential and encouraged and challenged me to stretch myself. But they really saw something in me that maybe in the beginning I didn't see in myself, and challenged me to step up and learn new skills beyond my current title. Two of those people in my career that really impacted my trajectory are Tim Scott, who is the future CEO of Biocom, and Aileen Ruff, who is currently the president of the contract manufacturing division at West Pharmaceuticals. They were very impactful to my career and helped me to, expand and really saw my potential. So I'd like to call them out. But I'd say really the key is sticking yourself out there. So anyone who's listening that is interested in a CDMO CEO career or a CEO career for themselves, I'd have to say, just lean in. Just like Sheryl Sandberg said, you have to lean in and put yourself out there and just trust yourself that you can do it and put the work in.
Do you think that the route that you came in through the business side could become more common than the traditionally male scientist path?
When you think about the path of a chief business officer into the role of the CEO, I definitely think that maybe it's not the traditional, especially for a high technology based company. But I do think there's multiple paths to the CEO position, and the industry is seeing the benefits of diversity and backgrounds and experience that different roles can bring to the role of CEO. And, when I think about the CDMO industry, I would say that having a background in sales and marketing has been very beneficial in preparing me for the role of CEO. We're a service-based company, and having a very strong connection to the customer is important for our long-term success. Understanding what their needs are has enabled me to build teams and capabilities that really drive that growth and demand for the clients.
And is there more that you think that companies themselves can do to support and elevate female leaders? I mean, as you're thinking about the kind of the culture that you're trying to create within Austin, what does that look like?
Yeah, there's definitely things that companies can do, and things that, as I step into the CEO role and want to develop the future leaders of our company, would like to do. I'd say the first thing that we can do is to offer flexible work arrangements. By offering flexible work options like remote work and flexible hours can really help a woman better manage their work-life balance, especially during the time that they have school-age kids, right? When I think about my career and the flexibility that I had working from home as a sales and marketing executive, and the support that I had both from my supervisors and the people that I worked with, having that flexibility was really key to allowing me to not only be there for my job, but also my family. Also, leadership development programs. You have to have programs designed to empower people and women to reach their full potential and help them understand what their path could be, whether that's management or scientific. Development programs are key. That's something that we've invested in a lot at Austin Pharmaceutics to make sure that people have the skill set to grow into leadership positions. And then, promoting workplace inclusivity in the culture, I think, is also a key, and making that part of what your culture is and what you do every day, empowering people to contribute their ideas. We talk a lot at Austin Pharmaceutics about psychological safety and creating a teamwork or a team-based culture where everybody is involved in solving really hard problems. And you have to tap into that across the organization, whether you're male or female.
Elizabeth, thank you. That's been fantastic speaking to you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Experience the future of contract manufacturing at CDMO Live 2025. Join us at the World Trade Centre Rotterdam on May the 7th and 8th, 2025 for an exclusive event that brings together the sharpest minds in biopharma outsourcing. For 2 days filled with market insights, best practices and partnering. Early bird tickets are now available, so head to cdmolive.com to download the agenda and to book your ticket.